And it's one of those things where like a beginner can get waves on them more or less. And then an advanced surfer, if you're burying 8 feet of rail on like a full roundhouse cutback, like into the whitewater, that feels insane. And that's that central, that rolling, arcing, carving, ball bearing seeing. It's easy to get a board to go on rail, but how do you get it to go on rail easy and then explode? That's an equation. The other side of the spectrum is making something that goes balls out down the line. Me and my shaping, that's where I'm coming from.
Welcome to the Basis Surf Podcast. Super excited. We got Ryan Lovelace here. He's a super innovative surfboard maker and creator. He shapes everything from crazy alternative boards. I mean, and it's interesting because I guess a mid-length isn't considered alternative anymore, but like a couple of years ago, it was like, whoa, that's crazy that you're riding a board over 6 foot, you know? And I think your boards were some of the boards that were kind of at the forefront of that in many ways, even though it is kind of going back in the time. But you do mid-lengths, you do even finless boards, but also high performance craft. I don't know if you guys have seen, pros like William Aliotti just ripping in super critical waves, like tucking the massive barrels on Ryan's board. So we're going to dive into all that. I think this is going to be super exciting because, just talking to a really great surfboard maker and just diving into the ins and outs, tuning your craft, picking the right board. There's a lot to get into. So just thanks for joining us, first of all, Ryan.
Happy to. You could burn an hour talking about any of that real easy.
Yeah, I know. Well, maybe we'll have to have you on for a second sesh, but let's see what we can get through today. Well, the first thing I wanted to start with, it's not even a question, but I just wanted to just say, riding one of your boards has actually been one of the more mind-opening and mind-expanding experiences of my life. I was just stuck on shortboards. I live here in Rockaway Beach in Brooklyn, where it's like 2 foot mush and just sucks. And then it goes to like barreling overhead waves. And there's very few, there definitely are your good days where it's just like rippable, 4 foot, whatever waves. But I just remember seeing a bunch of good, not a bunch. I saw a couple good surfers and they were riding these longer boards. And I'm like, what the heck are they riding? But they were making these like tiny waves, which I would just struggle on, just riding a little shortboard. But they were like linking these sections that you couldn't link. And I was just like, man, what are they doing? And they weren't riding a V-bowls, but they were riding like, what we call now mid-lengths or eggs or whatever you want to call it. Right. And so I remember seeing a V-bowls on Craigslist. I was like, all right, this thing looks kind of crazy, but I'm going to try it. And
that thing's fucking weird.
And it was wild. It was wild. I still remember one of the first waves I caught on it. And it was just like, as soon as it locked in, it just started to glide and just go and pick up speed on its own. And I was like, I was kind of like addicted to this experience. And it just totally opened my mind. And so, I guess first, let's just talk about kind of, what was your inspiration? How did you get into shaping these boards? Just give us a background on that.
Yeah, one thing to say V-bowls wise, it's funny because you click that quickly. They're like a love it or hate it thing. Like guys either like click and it's this like pseudo religious experience and they're just off and running and it's crazy, or they just cannot figure them out. So you either meet people that say like, oh, V-bowls are insane, or oh, V-bowls are plugs. It's one or the other. There's like, I think I know 2 people. They're like, yeah, V-bowls are a fun surfboard. Meh. I was like, wow. But anyways, it's just hearing you talk about that is funny. So I'm like, yep, that's the experience. Like hop on one and I'd be like, what the fuck? And you click. For me, like I was riding, my really early shaping, I was doing all kinds of stuff, fishes, bonder variations, longboards, eggs, whatever. And pretty quickly I found displacement holes. And I think I did about 6 or 7 years on only like full on displacement holes. And I want to qualify like displacement hole by saying like, there's a few like must-haves in a hole, which I don't consider the V-bowls a hole. A lot of people do, but I would qualify the real displacement hole has to be wide point forward. Immediately the V-bowls is disqualified. So for me, the V-bowls came out of about 6 or 7 years of only riding like full on bladed displacement holes in point waves. And I really wanted that sensation. I wanted that rolling underfoot, that ankle rolling looseness, lower body thing that the displacement hole really like gets into your core. And if you click on it, you click. But I wanted that in a board that I could surf in slower waves, like traveling into like Australia or beach breaks or anything like that. I wanted to be able to get that feeling in a board that would actually slow down. You could sit on your back foot for half a second or do something with that speed. And so that I mean, ultimately led me to the V-Bowls, but even then that was a good couple year experimental thing for me. So during that time, I went really heavy into mid-length. Clearly displacement holes are mid-lengths. So I was already like steeped in it, but it was really, for me, it was a time where I was looking at the greater kind of scheme of what everybody was riding, what everybody was making, what the world wanted. And I felt like there was this gap between longboards and shortboards that was explored, obviously. Lots of eggs and different things, but I didn't feel like it was really well defined yet as to what a mid-length should be. So that was exciting for me, was to like sit back and say like, okay, here's this gap between 6.5 and 9 feet. What's that supposed to do? What, if we sit in the middle of that at 8 feet, roughly, what should an 8-footer do? What's the goal? And so I just started really wanting to figure out what was in there and how I could carry those feelings that I wanted in a board that size. I should also say 8 foot was the longest that would fit in my car, nose to tail, where I could close the back. And that was big for me. I wanted to have one board that I could just roll with all the time. And so mid-lengths fit a lot of things in my surfing world, personally. Also being like 6'2" and orbiting around 200 pounds, give or take. I like foam. And being in Santa Barbara most of the time at that point, or all of the time at that point, small, knee-high, thigh-high waves. So yeah, I like long, flat, mid-length really, really, really handles like almost everything that's going to come your way, unless you're, exploring heavily and you get some of the bigger stuff. And then even then you could still push a mid-length into it if you really wanted to. So it was like a personal quiver necessity for me and just a personal preference. And I remember, it would have been probably around like 2009, something like that. I remember calling it. I was like, man, in like 3 years, everyone's going to be on mid-lengths. And I just remember every year went by and people still weren't clicking into it, weren't clicking in. I was like, what is going on here? And I had business and I had people wanting boards and it was cool, but it wasn't like going off. And then now finally, in the last 2 or 3 years, it's gone fucking ballistic. I'm like, oh, okay, welcome to the party. All these big, big manufacturers. I'm like, cool. All right, we've been down the street doing this for how many years? And all you guys did was middle fingers and try to spit on us and call us names. And now, welcome. But it's, they're all buddies of mine, but it's just funny. It's, and that's right. Like we were saying before we even started this, the cyclical nature of surfboard design. So I'm sure at some point, clear thrusters are going to pop off again and they'll be the thing in some facet.
Right. Well,
awesome.
I think the thing is, kind of like what you said, mid-lengths are kind of the most well-rounded. Like if you want to be able to surf small waves or really big waves and you're not a pro, like a really, really good surfer, you're probably going to need more volume depending on the wave, right?
It's an applicable fucking surfboard. And it's one of those things where like a beginner can get waves on them more or less. And then an advanced surfer, if you're burying 8 feet of rail on like a full roundhouse cutback, like into the whitewater, that feels insane. It's like anyone that surfs well that does that and isn't into that feeling, I got to question, because that's a sick moment. So like they offer something to everybody if you want to tap into that thing.
For sure. I actually saw Connor O'Leary. He made a post. He was riding the CI mid, and he did this big roundhouse cutty on this, giant wave. But he was on like a 6.5, 6'6" or something. He was like, that was one of the best feelings I've ever had. And I'm like, well, it did look sick. He went all the way up, rebounded off the, Look at where like before like
before the super foiled out chippy shortboards took over, look at where thrusters and performance surfing was, and it was power surfing. So you're talking, there's a lot of like mid 6 foot boards, thrusters, whatever. That's neither here nor there, but like mid 6 foot boards, a little volume positive, being power surfed in the pocket. To me, that's still the epitome of surfing. That's like what we should all be hoping to do. Now, to me, like is a 6'6" a mid-length? Fuck no. That's still, I mean, that's well into shortboard territory in my opinion.
Right.
Maybe a 6'9" is getting close, but like 7'0" plus, like I could say, okay, mid-length. But yeah, I mean, I kind of always got to laugh like when I see posts on social media. It's like, here's our new mid-length 6'2". I'm like, what the fuck are you on? And you think, like, 6'2" isn't even a step up for most people. Like, you're not even in like the realm. But
right.
But it's
That's
either
so funny.
apples and oranges, whatever. You know, the word
so
mid-length sells a lot of surfboards right now.
Yeah. Well, kind of going back to what you were saying though, because I'm really interested in the innovation, and because what's interesting about surfing is this marriage between like art and then just craft and like technology. Because a surfboard is like essentially like this thing that you're developing, and it has such a big role in the way you're going to be able to ride that wave and perform your art, right? And so, you mentioned that you saw this gap between shortboards and longboards, and you said I wanted to define what that specifically, just more clearly define what it was going to be. What kind of sensations were you looking to improve upon from the old school eggs? Because I mean, your V-Bowls has a very distinct they're very distinct design characteristics, right? Like wide point was back, the rails were super foiled. You mentioned like all these things. So what were you looking for trying to do there?
I wanted trim speed in a straight line. We're surfing small peeling point waves a lot. I wanted to go balls out down the line without doing anything. And there's a very distinct feeling with really knifed out thin rails where they take away from your forgiveness in the average surfboard. But if they're on something with the right rocker and rail line, like the feeling that you get out of it is insane. So like for me, I wanted something that spoke more to me in my surfing. And at that point, that was super flat, super bladed stuff. But I wanted those super flat, super bladed boards to be controllable on your back foot. And that's what I wasn't finding. I was either finding really eggy, doughy stuff that was really forgiving and fun. And I'm great boards, eggs, standard eggs and like classic eggs are killer. They're applicable for a lot of people. But for me, once you stand still and just park it and do nothing, you're just kind of like doing along. You're not, anyone who hasn't felt it isn't going to know what we're talking about. But when you come up and you lock in a V-Bowls or something that's knifed out, you lock that thing in the face, the sensation's crazy. It's a completely different ballgame. And so like I wanted that feeling, but I wanted that in a board that I could control in a slow point wave, or surfing like the Pass in Byron Bay or something. It looks like in photos you can run it out forever down the line, but really the waves are like way, way, way back here. And I realized how much more common those waves are in the world in my travels than stuff like Rincon. And that was, when I was in my early 20s and still really figuring out what the fuck was going on. There was a lot of learning to do, and that was a big one for me. It was like, oh, these boards that I'm loving aren't really as lovable in all these different waves. I mean, surfing in Italy or something, or it just wasn't clicking. And so the V-Bowls was an exploration in trying to find that.
Yeah. Well, I definitely felt it on the board. I remember that sensation so clearly. I was just like, whoa.
Yeah.
Just felt like it took off, and it was crazy. Yeah.
It's a really special thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So would you describe, how have you evolved the design? Like, is the V-Bowls your standard mid-length now? Or, I mean, I think I saw a lot of your guys are riding FMs now. Like so you went in one direction with the V-Bowls, and then how have things changed, I guess? Hey everyone, it's Van. Hopefully you've been enjoying the podcast. Hopefully you've been listening to some good stories, getting some good tips that are helping you improve as a surfer. If so, make sure to subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review. It'll only take you literally a few seconds, and share it with your friends. That's the best way you can support me, so I can continue to create awesome new content for you. So thanks.
I mean, for me, like, kind of like you said, I guess, in the intro, like my shaping is comprised of all these different things. It's all this experimental stuff, performance shortboards, mid-lengths, and this, flex tail stuff, all kinds of shit. For me, like the core of any shaper's shaping is what they're surfing. To me, that's my mid-lengths. So the core of my stuff has been mid-size things, and then plugging in all of those things that I learned from shaping for William and Trevor Gordon, all these guys over time, plugging them into mid-lengths and figuring out how to make them fucking nuts. That's the goal. So that for me, the V-Bowls got me going in my surfing in a direction, and then give it 3 or 5 years on a V-Bowls. Okay, how do I take this feeling and transition it into something that's going to make a little more speed on a flat-faced wave? And then that's the Thick Lizzy. Then that took over my shaping for 5-7 years. And then you say on the Thick Lizzy after that many years, okay, how do I take these feelings and this forgiveness and this trim speed, but put it on something that I can put all 200 pounds of my weight into and wrap without even thinking about it and smash the whitewater? There's the FM. Mm-hmm. So they're all kind of connected threads in my own surfing. So I don't really think any one of them has taken over anything. If there's a board that like I'm synonymous with, it's probably the V-Bowls, just because it's been around that many years. If there's a board I shape the most of, it's a Thick Lizzy still, because it's by far the most applicable board for most of my customers in terms of the mid-length realm. If there's a board that all of my like repeat customers over the last 15 plus years are coming back for, it's the FM, because they're figuring out that same trajectory that I did, V-Bowls, Thick Lizzy, FM.
Got it.
Or they've been surfing now some X production brands, neutral mid-length blowout design, and they want something more hyper-focused from like a mid-length specialist, FM.
Got it.
So it kind of runs the gamut, depending, for me, especially with a custom surfboard, which is all I really do. There's no like predetermined when I go into the conversation, this is what the guy's getting. Like, I want to hear the guy out, understand their surfing, see what they want out of it, and then within the realm of my boards and my experience, help guide that direction. So I don't think there's really a winner or a best. Or it's all a little ecosystem.
Right. And with surfboards, there's always trade-offs, right? There's speed versus control, and you're always just trying to figure out where you want to sit on that continuum based on your ability level, the board, the wave, all these things, right?
Yeah.
So just, I'm a surfboard nerd, so, and I'm sure that there's those in my community that love it. Yeah. I mean, obviously I got a V-Bowls, right?
Yeah.
So what were the key design attributes of the V-Bowls that made it what it was? And then how did you tweak those, going from the V-Bowls to the Thick Lizzy to the FM? Because you're going from, pure trim speed to more performance. Like what were the things that you tweaked?
I wonder if I had like a little sketch pad sitting around me somewhere here. This is when I started drawing in the dust on my walls. Perfect. So if you take a displacement hole, you've got a kind of low rocker that flows flat. I hope this translates. And then your deck is an S deck, so it has this hump in it. Can you see that at all?
I can kind of see it. It's the low quality is the issue. But maybe, let's just talk.
Okay, I'll try and I'll do my best here. It's like if you focus all of the volume in your board in one place. So that is, make the wide point in a spot and the thickest part of the board that same spot, and the deepest part of the bend in that rocker that same spot. You focused all of your volume into one area of the board. What that happens, depending on how you foil the board around that spot, is make it more or less sensitive and tippy and rolly from that space. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, totally.
So the V-Bowls taught me about that part of the board. This has most to do with mid-lengths, because in short boards, you're not really working with this concept as much because you're going to make a really twitchy board really fast. It's not going to work for most people.
And quick question. I mean, just to clarify for everybody that's listening as well. So when you're talking about a hull, you're talking about the bottom of the board has some belly as opposed to a concave, like on your normal shortboard, right?
Yeah, you've got, how to break that down. So a displacement hull would have a convex, like round bottom, wide point forward, thin, like bladed, pointy rails to various degrees. And then the rail line, the apex of the farthest point out on the rail goes in the tail low to high in the nose. So your rail is going to go like this in the nose and then slowly turn down in the tail. So you've got a few things working at the same time. And those are kind of like the basic tenements of a displacement hull. So doing all of those things puts your volume into one spot. The V-Bowls, what that was basically taking that spot, which is classically forward of the wide point, and taking it behind center and making it wide point back. So all of a sudden you have all that sensation, all that rolling and all that control, but behind center. That was not like, I'm not trying to say, because there's, I guarantee some people that'll roll their eyes. I'm not trying to say I was the first person to ever do that at all. That is not what's going on here. But in terms of foiling it out like a displacement hull, playing with that outline and understanding the rocker, it's a really unique thing. You could look at a photo of a couple boards and be like, oh, that looks similar to this. The foil is what differentiates a V-Bowls. So what the difference is how you take that thick part and then foil the board out and then work all the curves off of that point. So in terms of making different versions of the V-Bowls, like you're asking, it's basically about centering that point and putting it where you want it, and then working all of the details around that area. So if I leave the board a little bit more doughy, carry the volume a little more forward, and the rails a little more full, it's going to be a lot more forgiving. It's going to be better for somebody that's heavier or a beginner that's coming off longboards, rode a V-Bowls and really wants one, versus if the thing is really thick in the middle and then super thin on the rails and nose and tail and everything's really pointy and bladed out, that's going to be better for somebody that has experience on these boards and that really wants to take it up a notch and get like the craziest V-Bowls sensation ever. And all of that comes out in conversation when I'm kind of dialing in the board with somebody. But I'm basically just refining every edge and tip of the board around that point, depending on the feeling somebody wants. And check this out. How's my sweat? I've been watching this. In there? Oh God, I'm gonna give it like just over 100 degrees in here. I've been watching these little dots like grow as we keep talking, and I was like, oh, it's gonna get to a point where this is just drenched.
Yo, so just take the shirt off, man. Just let us see the chest.
Anyone that's watching, you can just track my fucking body temperature here. It's like it's starting up here too. Oh, all right,
man. Wet t-shirt contest going on over there, man. Looking pretty sexy. That's all I gotta say.
I got the wrong color. Yeah. I'm trying to hide.
I want to see the nips, man. All right. Well, so oh man. So the the way I think you described it earlier, which I think is a great way of describing the way the V-Bowls felt, is that you described it's like when you're at that center point and you're all the way back, which is the weird thing, is that you get this ball bearing effect. Like it's super sensitive to anything you do, and that's kind of like that ball bearing effect is part of the fun of it, right? And I'm sure that's that thing that you were trying to unlock that felt different from your old school eggs, which would just kind of more, not be as sensitive, and you'd feel like, oh, it just feels like a heavier kind of this leaden feeling as opposed to this really fast accelerating kind of ball bearing feeling.
Or even just neutral, when a neutral board is a good board for a lot of people. And some of us, me included, want a board that's got a serious fucking opinion about itself. I want to have to figure out what the board wants to a certain degree. There's boards I want that more from and boards that I don't. But I should say also that all of this V-Bowls discussion should probably boil down into that central feeling that you and I are explaining is what I'm trickling into all of my boards. in some degree, depending on
Mm-hmm.
what board it is and who wants what and how we're dealing with it. So we're talking all about V-Bulls, but to me in my brain, I'm just talking about the core of all of my shaping, which is that
Yeah.
feeling.
Right.
The FM has it, the thick Lizzy has it, depending on what someone wants out of it. Even Williams boards have a degree of it. So to me, that core feeling is what I think defines somebody as a shaper. Is if you could step on somebody's board without knowing what it is and be like, oh, this is that guy's stuff. That's, I think, really, really sacred in design. And that's that central, that rolling, arcing, carving, ball bearing thing is what I hope that is for me. When somebody steps on a board, and whenever someone does say that, like, oh yeah, I rode this board and I knew immediately it was one of yours. That's one of the best compliments. So that all of this V-Bulls discussion to me boils down to that feeling is the thing I'm working with and working for.
Yeah. Well, so a question for you then, as you've evolved your, the design, like I was looking at a picture of an FM and it had like, it looks almost like a duo, or at least very like relatively, well clustered twins, but then you also had the twinsers on it. Like how big has the fin set up, which was I had my V-Bulls was like a single, it was like a single plus side bites. How important has that been in terms of affecting the feel and the ride, and talk to us about that.
I mean, the fin is mostly like how you're going to control the sensation on the board, right? So you have all this rolling and all of this whatever you want the board to do. The fin is basically how you're going to connect that to the wave face in terms of powering. So like if you want the board to drive, or if you want it to noodle and sit back in the pocket, or you want it to pivot and snap, your fin's controlling a big portion of that. Equally as, I mean, probably more so than a lot of other factors in the board. There's a debate to have and all of the above, but you'll notice probably a lot of my boards don't have glass-ons. I work a lot with box fins. And that's mostly because I really like changing fins out, and I really like figuring out what fin is right for somebody. You would not be the first person that's gotten a message from me if you posted a video of yourself riding one of my boards, and I could tell something was going on there, and I asked for a picture of what fin you have in there. Because you can tell as a shaper what's working and what's not. And if someone's fin is too far back or too far forward based on how they're surfing and how it's reacting. So to me, the fin is super, super important. With the FM, it really came out of like, that cluster thing in terms of having the fins really close together. The design of the board and the fins together are one whole. There's no FM with those fins, or FM set up fin-wise on another shape, really. Like it's a unit, just like the duo, which is Neil Purchase Jr.'s thing that you referenced. And I rode a couple of boards with his fin placements, and a couple of his ones, and one or two that we had shaped together. And I liked that duo setup a lot. It spoke to me as like a single fin background guy coming off of V-Bulls and thick Lizzys. The duo clicked with me better than any other twin fin, because it was central and it had a central feeling under my foot, which I liked. I wasn't working the rails as much. I like working off the middle of the board, especially with that ball bearing feeling. That's what you're working around. So I wanted to play with, okay, how do I make this thing that's in the right direction for me feel a little bit more twin finny? How do I get it a little bit more happy on rail to where it's going to hook up and come around a little bit more intuitively for me? And the FM, the first one was a complete shot in the dark, as was the first V-Bulls, as was the first Thick Lizzy, and plenty of other boards that don't have a name. It was just a trial. I didn't know. I was just trying to swing for the bleachers and see if I could come up with something that went. And for me, the first session on the number one FM blew my fucking mind. I couldn't believe what was happening with my surfing, right? Not saying like I'm blowing everyone's mind, or I just couldn't believe where it took me as a surfer and what I was doing in terms of just wrapping carves that I thought that I was never going to do. As I grew up in Seattle. Like I'm not a born and raised surfer. I'm not one of those guys that surfing is just like breathing. Like I have to try. You know, it, it so the FM giving me that in my surfing was just mind blowing. So for me, that was really central to keep the fins, which were unique at that in that board, with the design as a whole, and then start figuring out how I was going to play with the board and all of the edges around that. So that's kind of always a thing, is find this board that blows my mind and then start exploring the three-dimensionality of it and what it does. So the
That's so
FM's
cool.
fins, like you said, were like, you know, the average twin fin is somewhere between, if it's a performance shortboard, 1.125 or 1.25 off the rail, or if it's like a keel fish, closer to like 1.5 inches. And FM is like 2.5 off the rail, which is a fucking mystery place for a fin. And that's exactly what I wanted to find, was that same thing about going, okay, so there's 6 and 7 foot boards and 9 foot boards. What's in the middle of there was the same with fins. I drew out Neil's duo setup, which is about 6-ish inches apart. And then I drew out a full keel setup, which is about 1.5 inches off the rail. And I drew lines between the front and back of all of those fins. And I just went from the duo right in the middle. And I was like, what the fuck is in here? Like, what is this empty space in fin placement? And then I took the fin that I was using in a duo, which was like a Smith Parrish, like brewer type single fin outline, and then a keel fin. So I took each of those two respective fin designs and laid them over each other and just drew literally, again, a line right in the middle of those two fin templates. That was the FM fin. And I just slapped it all together. I was like, let's give it a fucking shot. And it clicked. So for me, a lot of those things come from just exploring what I don't know, and what I don't see somebody else doing. If somebody else is already doing it, fuck, I'm going to go try what they're doing. If that's what's clicking, like if I want to try a displacement hole and when I'm 20, I'm going to try a Greg Little. If I want to try a duo, I'm going to get my hands on one of Neil's boards and try it. If I want to try a side cut fish, I'm going to try and find a Mick Mackey and try it. Like, if it's there, see what the guys that do it are doing. And if it's not, fucking balls to the wall, give it a whirl, see what happens.
Yeah. Well, I can speak to the duo setup because I picked up a used Arnold. He's based in Santa Barbara, Rincon area as well.
He shares a wall with me in my shaping room now. He just moved in a couple months ago.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, tell him I had one of his, I don't remember how big, it was like, I think it was like a 7.0 with the duo setup. And I rode this thing. I was like, wow, this setup is amazing. And you'll see like Chippa Wilson on a 6.0, like a little shortboard.
Those clips of Chippa when Neil and him started playing with it, fucking insane. Like that convinced a lot of us. They still do. And it's funny because it looks like a lot of fin, or it looks like it's going to be heavy, and then you step on one and you're like, oh, it's just another surfboard. It just works a little differently. Like all these things that you think are crazy aren't that crazy.
No, I mean, I struggle on single fins. I don't know how to ride a single fin at all. But going from riding, thrusters to duo, I was like, oh, in quads, I was like, oh, this makes total sense. It makes so much sense to me. I snapped it at Colorado's though. So it was kind of a bummer. Wow. So, it's you're obviously experimenting a ton, and what I find really cool is that you're solving a problem for yourself. And I feel like anybody that's really trying to solve a problem for themselves is really going to just be that much more dedicated to finding that solution, because it's like your own surfing on the line and you just want to get better. And that's so cool that the FM is just unlocking these new, areas in your surfing. And I'm sure it's going to unlock different areas for people that ride your board. So that's super cool. Now, what I'm curious about though now is, what is it, so this is like you're shaping for the everyday surfer yourself, and just probably the majority of your customers. What is it like shaping for guys like you mentioned, William Aliotti, Trevor Gordon, guys that are really good surfers? How did those relationships? Why don't we start with William? Like, how did that relationship develop, and then how did that evolve your shaping and all that?
I mean, to me, it's all a big feedback loop. I mean, what I learned from shaping shortboards for guys like that feeds back into how I treat my midlengths. And what I learned from shaping my mid-lengths and what I'm feeling feeds back into what I'm shaping for them, is that's my relationship to surfing and surfboards. So, I mean, shaping for really, really, high-end, top-end surfers is, to me, it's funny because it's gratifying and it's also heartbreaking at the same time, because you can make something that you think is going to work insane, or a new variation on something that has worked insane, and that one doesn't click like the first one. And you can also make, like last winter, William met me on Oahu and I made him 4 or 5 boards. And the first board I shaped out of that batch was like a 5'10" fish, like step up, like really foiled out shortboard fish. And I was absolutely least excited about that board by far out of the whole stack. It was like, I shaped that knowing it was like, yep, this is right along the lines of what he's been surfing. Cool. The other ones I'm really excited about because that's going to take us somewhere new. Of course, that was the one that clicked. It's like, you never know out of a stack, like what's going to work, someone's going to fall in love with. And I should say too, that shaping for Williams specifically, and most guys that I've worked with over time in that capacity, is like, it's usually a couple text messages where like, oh, I really want something kind of based on this last board, but I want like a 5'6", a 5'8", and a 6'1" for pumping slabs. And that's the brief. Like that's, then I get to do what I want inside of that. So there's a fair amount of wiggle room. And as a shaper, I have to choose how much do I want to wiggle and how much do I want to just nail what he already has. And it changes over time. As a creative person, you're always changing shit. And sometimes you're not trying to change it. But that loop of figuring out what works for him or for guys like William and what doesn't is really helpful in my surfing and my shaping, because it takes me farther. And then I can also discern what I'm feeling in my boards and wrap it back into what I'm doing for them. And I mean, I think you'd be really hard pressed in that, a lot of guys would say like, oh, he shapes shortboards, but he doesn't even surf many shortboards. It's like, well, there's a lot of fucking guys that surf shortboards and shape midlengths now that definitely don't fucking surf midlength. Like this goes both ways, man. Like,
right.
It just depends on how you translate the information that you have as a surfer and a shaper and what you're feeling to anybody else's boards. They can be a pro or a beginner. To me, it's equally as important. For me, it's probably actually more important to make a good board for a beginner, because they're not buying a ton of boards or they're not getting a ton of boards. And you know how much that matters to somebody that's like saved up all their money and they waited X number of months for this new board, reached out to the person they really want one from. Come on, like, you got to respect that. You've got to have this reverence for that transaction. And a lot of guys that get a lot of free boards don't have a whole lot of respect for free boards. So to me, like, I feel more pressure from like an adult learner trying to take their surfing somewhere than from a guy that's going to Tavarua for 2 weeks and wants 5 boards to take with him and he's going to break half of them. It's a different thing. It's very gratifying when you get a couple photos or a video in your inbox and the guy's going nuts and he said it's magic. That's fucking awesome. Obviously we live for some of that, but it's also fucking awesome when somebody calls you and they're like, oh my God, I just did my first actual cutback. Like, how cool is that? Like,
they're probably
you
more
got to help in that
pro.
transaction, right?
Yeah.
So like, it's equally as rewarding in different factions in terms of me internally. Like, I like it all. What I don't like is when someone gets a board and it's 2 shades too light of blue. That's like, anyways, next question.
Right. Well, so talk to me about
form.
Talk to me about the boards that you do shape for him, because like, I mean, wasn't he riding like, I mean, it seems like he rides a lot of twins, but like he's doing like pumping like heavy waves, you know? And like, well, yeah, what do you think Because he obviously reached out
Yups.
to you because he respects you as a surfer and he wanted boards from you. And but like, what was the flair that you added that you think you were giving him that he wouldn't get? Because he could obviously just rip on a regular shortboard too. And what do you
I
think he
don't
was
know. I
looking
mean,
for? And what?
guys like that, you can get boards from anybody. I mean, there's guys trying to give him boards. But he could go to anybody and get insane boards. I'm stoked that he keeps, this thing going with me. I'm flattered, and I hope that I'm providing something to him that he couldn't get somewhere else. I do know when he rides a bunch of other shortboards like that, there was a Twinfin board test a year or two ago. It was shocking how slow he was going on a lot of those boards. And then to see him the same wave, same conditions on what he and I were working on, so much more explosive. I was like, okay, so there is some proof in this pudding. Like, I am doing something different for him than, say, these big production brands. But granted, any good shaper, he was surfing other guys' boards before we ever met. And I should say, he came to me through a friend of ours, Manuel Claude Belmorel, who's a French artist and photographer who got a couple boards for me a long time ago. He started shooting William in the water and said, you guys should work together. So he brought William to me. I don't think William knew anything about my boards or my history at all, other than he rode one or two of them and was like, sure, let's give it a shot. And we just grew from there. He was a really good surfer, but his surfing has, gone fucking astronomical in the last number of years, like most young guys will when they're really focusing on their stuff. And he is really focusing on his stuff. That guy is on the road constantly surfing all kinds of fucking weird waves that I didn't design the board for. He's really hell bent on figuring out what a Twinfin can do and how far he can take it. I don't know anybody else right now. I'm sure there is some other people that are pushing twins as hard as he is, and taking them to the extents that he is. I mean, there's some stuff that he sent me that is not published online yet. I can't even explain. Like, crazy shit. That is just like, wow. That's a 5 whatever Twinfin. What are you doing in that slab? Like, what? How?
Right.
And so that for me, like, I'm pretty singularly focused. I want to make singular magic good boards for people. He is really focused on figuring out how far he can take a Twinfin. So us figuring out what that means is very cool. It's an interesting thing. And I think that the surfer shaper relationship is really, really special. And I feel really, really lucky to have him stopping holes in my boards. I think it's killer. I really enjoy talking with him. I really enjoy spending time with him, and I really enjoy seeing him surf. And it's a really cool thing that we've got.
What is that? You mentioned this. Was it the electric acid, or what competition was this between different twin fins?
No, it was he got an invite to basically just test a bunch of performance twins. I think it was for Stab, and they did it at Kandui. And it was right when he and I kind of decided, like, okay, we're gonna send it. We're gonna do a thing like exclusively together. We're gonna figure this out. And I think within like a week, they reached out and were like, hey, you can stay at Kandui for free for a long fucking time if you surf all these twin fins for this board test. And so he, graciously came to me and said, is it okay if I do this? And I said, fuck yeah, absolutely. You can. I'm not going to stop you from doing that. Like, what a great ticket. And then of course, I think it was actually done 2 years ago, but they put it out again this summer. So it's always a little bit heartbreaking for me, because then it goes like, I think he was going pretty viral surfing a bunch of other boards. And I was sitting there looking at clips that I have, and those clips, I was like, man, he's going like half as fast as he should be, knowing his surfing pretty intimately at this point in terms of watching. But it's really, that being said, I went into that saying like, okay, let's see what we can learn. Let's see if he really clicks with one of these boards, and what can we learn from that? Because that's, almost like me making him 10 other boards and then him surfing all of them and saying, I did like this, I didn't like that, I did like this, I didn't like that. To me, all that, that experience just showed me that we were on the right track. So
Yeah.
that's cool.
So what do you think is unique about your Twinfin design?
I don't know, because I'm sure there's people doing some similar shit. I know for me, I work within a pretty tight confined little box of like what I know is working. So like I work out of the same like 2 or 3 blanks. That's it. I don't swing from the bleachers every time. I try to work with a really similar rocker or a really knowable outline and try to do adjustments either which way, unless we're sending it and we're trying to find something really weird and new or different and cool. But I try with those boards to be really calculated and really know intimately the small details that I'm working through. I don't spend a whole lot of time looking at other people's boards. And then usually if or when I do, I pick one up, I'm like, whoa, fuck, wild, okay. Like, cool. A lot of my stuff performance-wise comes from just really knowable outcomes. So like I have almost the same tail rocker in like 3 of William's different boards that we're doing, and I'll adjust the outline around that rocker. That's a pretty minimal change. I'm not going to change 6 different things in the same shot, unless that's what we're going for. But I try to like know what I'm doing and control it, because in the end, what I want is to provide the surfer with a good board. So if I'm swaying from the bleachers every board that I'm shaping and just fucking sending it, I think I'm doing a disservice to that person's cash and their time and their attention and their effort and even reaching out to me. To me, at the end of the day, that's most important, is being respectful to somebody that decided to come to me to make them a fucking water toy. Well, like, lucky me, man. So
Right.
in terms of my boards, like what makes them special Twinfin wise, I mean, I'd like to think that rolling feeling that we were talking about earlier is still in there. I know for Williams boards it is. And you can see the way they go on rail and jump back. It's easy to get a board to go on rail, but how do you get it to go on rail easy and then explode? That's an equation. I think I tend, in a design spectrum, I think a lot of performance shortboard designs are really heavily centered around controlling speed, making a board stay in the pocket and work this way. So their design is coming from that side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum is making something that goes balls out down the line. Me and my shaping, that's where I'm coming from, is going balls out down the line at Rincon or any of the other points. So I'm coming into the control space with Williams boards, where most shortboard shapers, I think, are trying to make a faster board that is in control. So it seems like the feedback from William is oftentimes like the board is too fast. I want it slower. And so over time, the boards have gotten slower and slower, but I'm still trying to keep a hold of that explosiveness, and that's speed. So I tend not to dump the speed off of the rail as much as a lot of other shortboard shapers do. And I'll tend to work with a little flatter rocker, I think, than a lot of other shapers do. But to me, it seems like a lot of rocker coming from where I'm sitting. But then I look at other shortboards, I'm like, damn. So I don't know. I think I'm just coming from a different side of the spectrum in terms of design, from a speed, trying to control the speed. And the other side is control, trying to create speed. So maybe we're just on different sides of like a dividing line.
That makes sense.
Maybe that's it. I think that's maybe the one.
And then what happened? I mean, so obviously William is like extremely high level surfer. What happens? I mean, do you test any of his boards or like make similar boards for yourself? Do you have to like tone it down a little bit for the average surfer? Or
I surf really differently than William. Yeah. I'm more flow and momentum, where William is fucking psychotic. He's obviously got flow and momentum, but in a very different way to me. Like, I don't surf like that. So, I mean, I can understand what these boards are doing. And in my world, I mean, I can sit up at night and design a board in my head, go and shape it, and it works exactly like I thought it would. So when I shape Williams boards, generally I know exactly what the fuck they're going to do. I'm rarely surprised by the way a board works. I am surprised by where he decides to take it, like a 5'6" keel fish at Nazare. What? But rarely am I surprised by the feedback and the way that it works in a video. So for me, like, the same thing would be said when I try to give him a mid-length. Usually the feedback is, oh, it's not as fast as this board. Well, no, it's a mid-length. It's different. You're supposed to flow and cruise on it. Or, oh, I can't go as vertical as I want. Yes, it's a mid-length. That's not the way they're supposed to work. So it's a different side of the spectrum. I think that's probably why I try to shape so like known and controllable, because I don't surf Williams boards. I can't. I physically like don't move like that. I don't generate speed like a thruster or a tiny Twinfin wants you to. I generate speed through like the rail line and drawing out long lines. So I'm basically just working with feedback and knowledge of going on 20 years now of hand shaping at least a board a day, every day for those 20 years, and like understanding the blank and understanding my process and understanding what comes out of that. And at this point, yeah, it's not really a question of if a board is going to work, it's how it's going to work. And am I hitting that on the head? But I think kind of like I alluded to before, there's a lot of shapers that don't surf the different boards that they're shaping. I mean, you literally cannot name a name because it's pretty much everybody.
Right.
They're, yeah. No, I'm not surfing a rabbit's foot for sure. No, I can't even fucking squat half as low as I'd need to. I'd like to, It would be cool. But again, I'm like a glorified adult learner, right? I mean, like I surfed every year for like a week-ish at best when I was a little kid, visiting my grandparents in Hawaii and then going to like the Oregon coast from Seattle when we could. But I didn't get to start like hammering at my surfing until I was 18, until I moved, from Seattle down to California. So for me, like I can't hop on a tiny shortboard and be like, all right, let's fucking go blow the lid off of this wave. Like I got to work on it. And I got to try and apply myself. And that's also for me, that's the fun. Like I want to try. Anyone that knows me intimately knows that I rarely choose like the easy way out. I like to work for it and I like to try and I like to apply my brain to my hands or to my feet or whatever I'm doing. And I want to figure out this equation to make something work.
But I think that's like a really good place to be coming at it, for somebody that wants your boards, because you'll understand them in a way that somebody that grew up surfing and is just like absolutely rips, they're not going to be able to understand that everyday surfer in that way,
I have that conversation every now and then. Most recently, and most applicably recently with Jonah Hill. And that's really like, because he's coming from an adult learner point. And I was telling him, I was like, look, like, here's the reason that this is going to work between you and I is like, that's my fucking history too. I know your struggle and I know your waves and I know what's hard for you and I know what unlocked these things for me over time. So let me do that. And I think, the thing that I used to get made fun of a lot for, like early in my surfing and shaping was like, because I was a fucking barn. Sure. But being a barn and working through it is exactly what like my superpower is now for shaping for people. Because I understand so much more intimately the challenge of just fucking surfing for the average surfer than somebody that was born and raised surfing. It's a different thing. So like, I'm really thankful for not being raised in surfing. I get to sit I always feel like I'm on the outside, like floating way out here in space and looking at it. I'm really grateful for that perspective. I don't want to take it for granted ever. I don't want to take surfing or shaping for granted or the lifestyle that it provides for granted. It's a really fucking privileged thing to do that we all do. It's crazy. Like looking at the world from a wider lens, this is ridiculous that surfing is like our life. What a joke. Like we should all be so lucky. So
totally.
I don't mind like not being a fucking world-class surfer. I can get waves. I'm just fine. I surf better than the average person, I think, in the water, but I'm not blowing fucking minds. But that learning to get to that point as an adult and as a young adult is really special in terms of how I can relay that now into a custom surfboard for somebody. It's a really, really, I think, a unique thing.
Yeah, no, that's great. So we'll work towards closing up, but carrying this thread a little bit further down, what do you think the biggest mistakes that average surfers make when it comes to board selection?
I think the biggest one immediately is going too small, too fast, and I think that's kind of like on the shaper side of the equation, like the known evil in board building for people is thinking, okay, I'm getting better. That means I should go down in size. I think a lot of people waste a good number of years in their surfing trying to figure out, once they go down in size, how the fuck to control that thing. Usually your mind is way ahead of your actual self. And so you think it's time, and it's definitely not time to go down in size. And then people go back up and find where they probably should be, or at least where is applicable for how they're surfing right now. I think just the other thing is to say, like, going down in size isn't best because that's not how everybody moves, right? Like, if you're trying to generate speed and control speed and you're surfing, you need to be on a board that responds to the way that you move as a physical human being. If you're really stompy, sure, a shortboard's going to work pretty good for you, or something with a bit more width across the deck that's a little thinner is going to work for you. Cool. If you generate speed from standing in one spot and flowing, it's going to be a really different board that's going to make speed for you. So the goal isn't in just going smaller is better. It's in figuring out how you generate speed and how you control it and what board works for that technique. So a lot of my chats with people when we're figuring out their board is about how they approach a wave, how they stand on a board, what they want to do on a wave, and what they're surfing right now. And you kind of start to piece together what's going to work best for them. But yeah, smaller is definitely not always better. It is very oftentimes much worse.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because that evolution is the exact same evolution I went through, riding shortboards, they work great when the waves are pumping and it's perfect. But, when the waves are tiny or when the waves get really big and barreling over here, like I started riding more volume. I was like, oh my God, this just like opened up this new world. And I still ride like 25-liter shortboards and, I enjoy those, but I still will go back and ride, bigger boards as well. There's just, it just depends on what the wave is, how you feel and all that. So I totally agree with that. All right, man. Well, it was such a pleasure. Thanks for joining. I think we learned a ton here. Anything else you want to say? Any shout outs, anything like that?
Check in here. Oh, radical.
I don't see those nips, man. You need to get that sweat going a little bit harder.
Here's what I'll put in as a closing. When you said that about my nips, I flashed back. Whenever I go live on Instagram, if you watch me shaping live anytime, you'll probably see a friend of mine in there saying, dump them out. I have a legion of my closest friends that encourage me to pull out my nuts anytime that I go live. So when you started talking about showing me nipples, showing you my nipples, all I could think was dump them out in my head. Anytime I'm shaping live on Instagram, all I can think of is how many of my buddies are screaming dump them out right now. It's wild. So thanks.
They're probably dumped out right now, and you're just not showing it to me.
Hey, if you want to see the real sweat, no. No, so it's, I guess that if I were to make a shout out, it's my buddies that understand that reference.
All right,
because they're the real ones. They get it.
Cool, man. Well, thanks again. Hey everyone, it's Van. Hopefully you've been enjoying the podcast. Hopefully you've been listening to some good stories, getting some good tips that are helping you improve as a surfer. If so, make sure to subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review. It'll only take you literally a few seconds, and share it with your friends. That's the best way you can support me so I can continue to create awesome new content for you. So thanks.